You are entertaining too limited ideas of the work for this time. You must take broader views. The message will go in power to all parts of the world, to Oregon, to Europe, to Australia, to the islands of the sea.
The grand narrative of who we are as Adventists is intimately knit with our history and the influence of Ellen White in shaping the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Australia and the South Pacific. We are a people entrusted with truth, and while this truth can oftentimes be lost in the retelling of stories, it can always be found again in the preservation of our history. The circumstances that led to Mrs. White journeying to Australia and her devotion to creating a church establishment, despite the various struggles she faced, reveals to us the significance of our message and the importance of our mission in sharing the truth to the world. Mrs. White faced many struggles in her journey to Australia, as she was not only a woman in ministry, but she was also an advocate for racial justice and was considered progressive and outspoken about her radical ideas. As a woman taking religious leadership role, Ellen White faced a lot of criticism in her early ministry. She was scrutinised and her character was questioned. She records one instance of this saying,
My brother wrote to me and said, I beg of you, do not disgrace the family. I will do anything for you if you will not go out as a preacher. Disgrace the family, I replied. Can it disgrace the family for me to preach Christ and Him crucified?
Ellen White's views and activism was progressive for her time and stirred up some serious opposition, even within her own church. She was an outspoken advocate for racial justice and actively appealed for more to be done in the southern schools for black students and for more Adventist work in the southern mission fields.
Many Sabbath keepers are not right before God in their political views. These brethren cannot receive the approval of heaven while they lack sympathy for the oppressed colored race.
Her passion and mission for all racial groups and her commentary on spiritually charged political matters was not well received by the church in America. Her ideas were radical for her time and inflamed opposition. This was one of the reasons she was pressured to leave America by the General Conference.
Some who are bearing responsibilities in America seem to be very persistent that my special work should go to Europe and Australia.
She was hesitant to come to Australia because her path was not yet made clear to her by God.
I have not special light to leave America for this far-off country. Nevertheless, if I knew it was the voice of God, I would go.
Without a direct answer from God, she travelled to Australia anyway, journeying with the faith that God would close the door if this path did not accomplish His will. She set sail from San Francisco to Sydney on the SS Alameda, with a brief stop in Samoa, arriving in Sydney on the 8th of December 1891. Not long after she arrived in Australia, she was bedridden with rheumatic fever which left her in constant pain and limited her ability to work. Her health continued to worsen over the following 8 months, but during this time of suffering, she turned to God for comfort and strength. Despite it being a time of terrible pain, she reflected,
I am thankful that I had this experience because I am better acquainted with my precious Savior. All through my sickness, His love, His tender compassion was my comfort, my continual consolation.
Despite her illness, Ellen continued to write while she lay in her bed. Even her ailment would not impede her work, and once she had finally recovered, she set off around Australia and the South Pacific to continue God's work in sharing truth to the world.
She moved to Melbourne in 1892 and stayed there for 2 years. While in Melbourne, she set up the Bible School for Missionary Work, which opened on August 24th, 1892. She travelled around Australia, and it was no easy feat, as she had to rely on horse and carriage or train to get from place to place. She spent almost all of 1893 in the North Island of New Zealand, then returned to Sydney on December 22 before heading down to Melbourne to attend Australia's first camp meeting on December 29th. During these travels, she attended various church meetings and established churches, gave communities spiritual guidance, and gave public lectures to large audiences. She journeyed to Tasmania, South Australia, and Queensland. In 1894, she came to Sydney with the intent for looking for land on which she could start a school. And in 1895, she settled in a rural township of Cooranbong, which would go on to become the central hub of Adventist education and spiritual ministry in the South Pacific.
We have found ourselves on missionary soil, in a land where there were but few Sabbath keepers and scarcely any facilities. We made it our first work to unite with the faithful laborers there in an effort to open the field as rapidly as possible. The Lord gave us access to the hearts of the people and blessed our efforts to save souls. Churches were organized and meeting houses were built.
What started out as a setback in her ministry, the objection and resistance to Ellen White, and her radical views and passionate zeal for God's love and truth, became an avenue through which God would spread His word and His truth to the whole of the South Pacific. Neither opposition, hardship, or sickness could prevent God's ministry from spreading throughout the South Pacific. A ministry which continues boldly to today.